Comments. Cam reiterating he's being his authentic self and can't live for other people's approval, while Rivera explaining the focus should be on your merit, not your race. Stephen A., your reaction to what we just heard?
Well, my reaction is, number one, I applaud what both of them had to say, both Cam and Coach Ron Rivera. Now let me compartmentalize and take one at a time. Number one, with Cam, it especially resonates with me in a very, very special way, simply because what Cam Newton is saying is that he's going to unapologetically be himself. What he's not going to do is allow folks to sit there and change the rules of the game just because he is who he is. As a quarterback, he has to go out there and produce, meaning he has to win games, he has to be a leader, he has to be somebody that galvanizes his troops and maximizes their potential. Once he lives up to that, what is somebody's problem? Usually what the problem entails, particularly as it pertains to African-American stars, is folks in America want to tell you how you should act on top of how you should perform. And clearly, to some degree, folks in America have a right to feel that way. I'm talking about folks outside of the African-American community because it makes sense. You don't want anybody engaging in lawlessness. You don't want somebody to be so in your face with things to the point where it's inappropriate, it's offensive, it's all of these different things. However, along the way, when we saw prime time prancing into the end zone to the days of Billy White Shoes Johnson, before that to a myriad of individuals who have performed on an exceptional level throughout the history of sports in this nation on far too many occasions, what we have is a situation where if you are African American and you happen to be exceptional, that's not enough. Folks want to tell you then how to behave, even when you are behaving within the confines of decency and what have you. You've got Ron Rivera, his teammates, and a plethora of contemporaries in the NFL that have absolutely no problem with how Cam Newton performs and how he sits up there and celebrates. And then all of a sudden you have folks who have a problem with how he celebrates, and it's usually when they've lost to him. We sit there and we've got a letter from a mom that brings her 9-year-old child to the game, and she talks about how Cam Newton is being paid millions of dollars to be a role model and perform and conduct himself in an exemplary fashion, okay, after her Tennessee Titans had lost the game. My whole thing was, okay, you have a point. I get where you're coming from, and you have the right to feel the way that you feel. But what was Cam Newton doing that day that he hadn't done before? You knew beforehand that Cam Newton was Cam Newton, yet you picked this game to bring your daughter to. What is he supposed to do? Change his behavior when you knew what you were getting when you walked into the stadium? So you have to take those things into consideration. At the end of the day, what he is saying is he's not Tom Brady. He's not Peyton Manning. He's not Drew Brees, but he is still worthy of being celebrated. Deal with that, and that's the reality. Now we get to Ron Rivera. I appreciate his position. He has a right to feel that way. He is not wrong. But what I would like to say to Coach Ron Rivera is this. When you talk about how everybody should be judged on their merits, fair enough. Who hasn't begged for that in American history, particularly as it pertains to the minority communities? Whether it's African American, Hispanic, Native American, it doesn't matter. The fact is that we all crave for a meritocracy. We also happen to know that it does not entirely exist, that there's a lot of politics that sift into the equation, where there are other things, ancillary things that come into play that influences decisions, and it's usually not based on merit. Because if that were the case, is Ron Rivera the only Hispanic that's qualified to be a head coach in the NFL? I sincerely doubt that, but he's the only one. And so when we look at it, I hear where he's coming from in terms of what we aspire for it to be. But the reality is that in this nation, even in the year 2016, that is still not totally the case. We still have a long ways to go. And so when he says, I don't think Cam Newton wants to be known as an African-American quarterback, he just wants to be a great quarterback, in a way it applies to me, because I don't just want to be a great Hispanic coach. I want to be a great coach, yeah. But the flip side to it is that when you embrace your heritage, when you unapologetically are black, when you unapologetically are Hispanic, and you succeed, you bring attention to not just your own individual greatness, but the greatness that could easily emanate from your community if people paid more attention and exercised the meritocracy and were willing to be fair. The fact that they're not is the reason why we look at Cam and notice his blackness, that we look at Ron Rivera and notice his Hispanic heritage, because we're saying, see, yet another example of what we can do if we're allowed to shine. There's nothing wrong with that, because that is not something we choose to be. That is something we're forced to be. As a black man, or as a co-host on a national television show, as a black man, as a host of a national radio show, I despise having to bring up race. I hate it. I wish we never had to talk about it. But I'm realistic enough to know we have no choice unless we want to sit idly by and allow unfairness to be continuously and perpetually exercised.
All beautifully said. I love doing the show with you because you are a proud black man, and you stand for what you believe, and when it is time, you bring that up, and you do not back off that, and I respect that, and I embrace that for the sake of this show. So, given the fact that I very obviously am a white man, I am confused today. And I need you to walk me back through a couple of levels of this that are fascinating to me, that I want to learn from what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to remind you again, as I pointed out yesterday, I was on the forefront of the rise of the black quarterback in this country. I had the great fortune of being able to cover James Shaq Harris with the Los Angeles Rams in the mid-1970s, the first black quarterback to consistently start in the NFL. Then I had the great fortune of being sent by the LA Times for an entire week to Grambling State in Grambling, Louisiana, for a whole week with the great Coach Rob. You remember Eddie Robinson, one of the greatest college coaches, if not the greatest college coach ever. And a young man by the name of Doug Williams, who was going to be drafted pretty soon. And I went back home to LA and I wrote a big splash piece that was just all over the top of the Los Angeles Times sports section that said, here is a special young man who's going to be a special pro football player as a quarterback. As I said yesterday, he fell all the way to 17th in the first round, which I thought was dead wrong. And he went on to become the first black quarterback, as we all know, to win a Super Bowl. What did both of those men, James Harris and Doug Williams, impress upon me time and time again? What were they haunted by? What was their mantra and their constant refrain? Please, please do not view me or label me as a black quarterback. I just want to be a quarterback. The day we can just become a quarterback is the day we win as a culture and as a race. I interviewed dozens of black quarterbacks along the trail, all the way from the mid-70s up to Donovan McNabb, who also uttered that constant refrain. Would you quit calling me a black quarterback? I'm a quarterback. I want to be viewed and judged as only a quarterback because I can do it all. I can throw it from the pocket. I can run when challenged to run. You knew Donovan McNabb well when he played. So did I. So all of a sudden, we have a big sea change yesterday because I heard a young superstar black quarterback refer to himself as African American and embrace that. And it's a little confusing because we've come full circle to this. And I know, I get what you're saying. You've got to, as Cam said, you know, he's going to embrace his roots here. But put it in perspective. Where did we come from, James Harris and Doug Williams, to Cam Newton? What changed?
Well, what changes, you know, the augmentation of the presence of the black community in sports. You know, when you talk about ESPN demographically in terms of who watches ESPN, of course, the nation watches ESPN. But there's a whole bunch of black people that gravitate to their television sets. There's a whole bunch of black people that are listening to talk radio, particularly if you elevate the level of diversity within sports talk radio, because there's a whole bunch of black folks that watch it as well. There's a whole bunch of Hispanics that watch it as well. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you have to take that into consideration. And then when you talk about the evolution from the Donovan McNabbs to a Cam Newton, well, I mean nothing but the total amount of respect, because I love me some Donovan McNabb as a person and as a brother. But where is he today? Where did that get him? You know, because the fact of the matter is you have a whole bunch of people that sit up there and looked at him and felt like he should have been more assertive. He should have been more unapologetically black. He should not have been somebody that was willing to, I don't want to say hide, because he certainly never did that. I certainly don't want to accuse him of something like that. But again, he just wanted to be a quarterback. Well, guess what? Cam Newton just wants to be a quarterback as well. But what he is saying to the rest of America is, don't ask me to ignore who I am, where I come from, what I stand for, what my beliefs are, just because you like what you're seeing from me on a football field, and now you want to transcend that to another level, and you want to have some level of influence as to how I behave and carry myself. Am I breaking any laws? Am I getting in any kind of trouble? What am I doing? I'm playing football and I'm celebrating on the football field. And when it's over, I go home and I mind my business. I contribute to the community. I give footballs to little kids. I ingratiate myself with a younger generation of individuals who look up to me, not just on the field, but off the field. But that's not enough, because what you want me to do is you want me not just to play the way you want me to play, but act the way that you want me to act, without your willingness to embrace something that's culturally different from who you are and what you represent. Now, to be fair to folks in the white community and beyond, let's be clear about something here. Folks have the right to look at Cam Newton and say it's absolutely, totally not about race. We're just looking at you, Cam. We're not talking about black folks or anything. We're talking about you and your celebration in the end zone. That is absolutely true. But you have to embrace the fact that Cam Newton has been a quarterback in the NFL for 5 years now. Cam Newton has had press conference every Wednesday. Cam Newton has talked to the media constantly. He's been bombarded with questions on a weekly basis. He's had his character questioned. He's had, his integrity questioned. He had his commitment to excellence questioned all of these years. So now that he's winning, he's saying, what do you have to say now? You come up with this? This is all you've got? See, it's always going to be something. Why does that have to be the case? Now we parlay that to a Tom Brady. Where are the questions? To a Peyton Manning. Where are the questions? To a Drew Brees. Where are the questions? I mean, damn, how about even Jay Cutler, who gets a pass for crying out loud, and he's never won a damn thing? What about Tony Romo? He's never won a damn thing. But these questions don't seem to persist with individuals of a different hue. Why would that be the case? Particularly when they haven't enjoyed the level of success that this man is enjoying. Some of them have, some of them haven't, some of them have enjoyed more success. These are I'm not saying that we have the answers. What I'm saying is that Cam Newton is standing before you legitimately presenting that kind of inquisition, that kind of question, because as black people, we sit back and these are the kind of things we find ourselves asking ourselves.
Okay, now, let's get to the crux of this, because this is what thoroughly confuses me, and I must admit to you, is starting to offend me as a white guy. And I need to qualify myself, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this. You could find no bigger fan of Vince Young pre-draft than this guy right here. You could find no bigger fan of Robert Griffin III before he was drafted than this guy right here. Campaigned for both of them, and as I told you, I would have taken Robert over Andrew Luck that you wanted in that draft. And I point out to you that when that word came out of Riley Cooper's mouth, I was the first one to stand up and say, suspend him and cut him. He can no longer coexist in that Philadelphia locker room.
You did say that.
Okay, so just for the record. Now, back to the premise here. I keep seeing, reading, hearing that everyone, quote unquote, everyone is criticizing Cam Newton. And I got to tell you from my heart, I don't know who everyone is. In fact, I've scoured the internet for everyone who has criticized Cam Newton for his celebrating, and I can only find black players on teams that he beat who were not, that they felt disrespected by some of his celebrations. That's all I can find, except for one Rosemary Plorin of Nashville, Tennessee. You remember Rosemary? She was the one you referred to. She wrote the letter to the editor, so to speak, of the Charlotte Observer because she was so offended, and she sounds like just a casual fan living in Nashville, Tennessee, a fan of the Titans. She took her 9-year-old daughter to her daughter's first game ever, and Cam Newton, she felt, rubbed it in at the end of the game. And you remember the lengthy celebration that he did after the 27-10 touchdown with 2.5 minutes left in that game that they ended up winning 27-10. And her point in this letter, which I reread, in fact, I must admit, it was the first time I've really carefully read this letter today. It's pretty thoughtfully written, and it's pretty balanced. But her point in the end was that they were surrounded by Panther fans in the end zone who started to adopt the behavior of Cam and started taunting Titans fans in their own stadium, and it got profane. We know how pro football games get. It can be a dangerous place in those stands. And she was offended because her daughter was so shocked by all this and could not figure it out. And, of course, because her team lost and it seemed like Cam was kind of the ringleader of this, she wrote this letter. Then a few days later, she wrote an email to the Charlotte Observer reporter that they printed apologizing, backing off, saying, because Cam had been very thoughtful in his response to her publicly. And so she backed off and apologized for her stance. And yet today, even now, she has become the face of racist white backlash against the celebrating superstar black quarterback. She's the face of it. I don't care what you say. That's all we're basing this on is poor Rosemary Plorin. And did her reaction during this game come from a racist place? I don't know. It could have. I don't know. But does racism exist in the United States? You better believe it. How many times do we talk about that? It is alive and well, or as I always say, alive in hell in this country. We get that. But in this case, to me, and I got my little unscientific circle of friends, a lot of them are white. And they love Cam Newton. He is beloved. He is exciting. He is entertaining. And obviously, we're in a new day with a second-term black president. And Lil Wayne, every time he's on the show, we talk about this. He reminds me that the majority of rap records are bought in this country by white kids. So it's like it's a new day where I think Cam has become the face of the NFL. I don't think there's a white backlash against Cam Newton, but maybe I'm missing it. You're going to have to help me here. All I know is Rosemary Plorin was upset because her team got its butt kicked by Cam Newton, and she went home and she was just so upset about what her little daughter went through, and she wrote this letter and then backed off it. She's the face of white racism now, to me.
I certainly wouldn't classify her as that. She has a right to an opinion, and I thought she was very respectful in what she said, what she expressed as a concern. I respectfully disagree with some of the things that she said, but I thought she was respectful, and I certainly wouldn't label her that way. And I think a parent looking out for their 9-year-old daughter and being concerned about some of the things the child was seeing is apropos. It's to be respected. So I certainly don't want to come across as being as dismissive in that regard. I would remind you, however, what I said earlier. She kind of knew what Cam would do coming to the game, and she came anyway.
Well,
so let's keep that in mind.
I don't know, Stephen A. I'm not sure she's that big of a fan. I'm not sure she knew all that much. I think she fell into this and wound up in an end zone seat right there where Cam was going through his celebration.
That's fair. The other point that I would make to you is that maybe it's based on what you're reading. Maybe you're not listening to talk radio enough and listening to listeners and callers calling in and some of the things that they say and some of the things that hosts say themselves. That's number 2. Number 3, you have to remember that the story has somewhat faded because of all the games that have transpired in the weeks that have followed. But initially, when that incident went down, it was front page news. It was talked about on this show. It was talked about Mike and Mike. It was talked about on other networks, and it was talked about for days on end. Well, to the black community, that story doesn't fade. Just because we've moved on to different stories doesn't mean that folks forgot what kind of heat Cam Newton was getting. It was aimed in his direction, rather, because of the end zone celebrations and what have you. And we sent stuff like that. And so when we sent stuff like that, listen, here's what it comes down to. the fact remains that anybody, white or beyond, can make the point and make a plausible argument that it's not about that. But it's not just about what it actually is. It's how it's perceived, too. We are in an election year. Skip, you have politicians that literally have to watch not just every speech, every paragraph, every sentence, but every single word that they say because of how it's perceived. You know what heat I took because of a particular word that was misconstrued. Skip, I was big on the lecture circuit. It cost me money because of what is perceived, and I have been a lifelong advocate against domestic violence, okay, and raised by women. But because of a word, all right, and how things were misconstrued, it's cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So be it, I'm fine. My point to you is that the power of a word, let alone words, let alone sentences, let alone speeches, can ultimately resonate in such a fashion that even when it fades from the headlines, it still permeates and exists in a very profound fashion. And it's something that you just have to deal with because it is what it is. Cam Newton is a black man who is young, energetic, vibrant, magnetic, and highly talented and successful. The reality is some people may have a problem with it because he is successful and they're just rooting against him. Others may have a problem with it because they don't want him to be in that position. And what white America has to embrace is the fact that, true or not, because of history being on our side, when it comes to that, from an historical perspective, we have no choice a lot of times but to assume the worst because history tells us it usually is so.
Well, yeah, maybe distant history. I don't know, Stephen A. I'm not sure.
Skip,
this...
seven
Yeah,
head coaches. There were 7 head coaching openings. How many got hired? How many blacks got hired?
Okay, I got it. But I'm with you. I'm with you on that front. But on this front, I'm just not sure that this isn't an exaggerated storyline. I
think it's possible.
Okay,
I think it's possible that it's exaggerated.
There are a lot of white people out there saying, gee, you're wrongly condemning us. We love Cam. Like, where did all this come from?
But wait a minute. I'm not condemning anybody. I'm saying that you may be right and white America may be right. I'm just see, that's the problem with the subject of race. Everyone's looking for a conclusion. There's no conclusion. The only conclusion that you can draw is through dialogue. In no way am I looking at white America and I'm saying, oh, you hate Cam. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying to you is that there inevitably will be black folks who feel that way. To some degree, Cam Newton feels that way.
Apparently.
Right or wrong,
sure.
I'm simply talking about this is how he feels. So a lot of times people want to deal with right and wrong. You only get to deal with right and wrong when it comes to tangible facts. But when it comes to perception, that's wide open. And you have to deal with the fact, I think a lot of times, I am a black man that's quick to say on many occasions, this ain't about race, this ain't about race, that ain't about race, that ain't about race. But I don't ignore the fact that to some folks, they perceive it to be that way. And ignoring it is fool's gold because it doesn't go anywhere. You have to address it.
Okay.
I don't believe that's the case with Cam, but I do believe to some degree Cam believes that, and I do believe there's a plethora of other players and other folks out there who believe that it is about that. That's what you have to deal with. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I have a whole lot more to say about this, and I hope we're going to get back to it.
We are.
Several times in the show.
Definitely, with LaShawn McCoy and Ryan Clark, and I appreciate this dialogue. It's just getting started on this show. There's only one African-American quarterback in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's Warren Moon. We know Cam's looking to change that his way. Up next, LeBron has a new coach, and he's taking a lot of heat for it. Cleveland's favorite son opens up on the haters. Here's Tyronn Lue with our Stephen A. on LeBron.